Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Seibert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
All right, welcome to Relationships Inside Out today. We have a very special guest in Blair Wulfekuhl, who has been around foster families and that whole process for a little over 10 years. And today we want to talk about foster families. We think they don't really get a lot of attention, which is a problem considering this is a very real option for many families, either by choice, right? They want to adopt, or potentially they're not able to conceive themselves. And so this is an option. So we want to get a little more insight on that, what the dynamics look like. So Blair, tell us a little about yourself, welcome. And
welcome.
Yeah.
Hey guys, like I said, my name is Blair Wulfekuhl. I am actually the executive director of an early child care program. But prior to that, I was a social worker and worked with foster families for about 12 years. And I am a foster family myself.
That's awesome.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. And tell us a little bit about how did you get into that realm? Like, what was the drive for you?
Yeah, so I originally got my bachelor's in psychology and then went on to get my master's in social work. And I just found a passion for working with children and families. So I got a certificate in child welfare and went on to work as a case manager originally. When I first came out of my master's program, I was a caseworker and was going into the home, working with families, working with children, working with foster families to try and get their lives back on track so that they can get their kids back.
Ermin, how did you transition into also being a foster mom?
Yes, that's a great question. So about 4 years ago, my husband and I were really talking about how we saw a need in the community. As someone who placed children in foster homes, I saw how important it was to be able to have local families be able to take local kids and keep all their connections to school, connections to their family members, to church. All the things like that. And so I actually had a hysterectomy really young at 27. And we have 2 biological kids, but we always felt like we had more love to give and more space in our home. And so we decided to move forward with getting licensed as a foster family, which requires training and background checks and someone to come out to your home, make sure you're a safe option. And originally we were just in the area to adopt. That was the original conversation. But then we got a call from our church that a family member that was going to our local church wanted a family for their grandson, and they didn't want him to go to just anyone. So we said yes. That was our first yes in foster care. We said yes, and we took him in, and we had him for a year and worked with his mom, and he ended up being reunified after about a year of being with us. And it was the hardest and most amazing thing that I think we've ever done.
Imagine that reunification for you and for your hubby, after you've taken this kiddo in for a year and then having to, I don't want to say give kiddo back, right? But give kiddo back to his mom's arms. I imagine that's tough. Like, you build a bond in that time.
Oh yeah. And so, one of the things we really talk about a lot as a social worker working with foster families is you want to love and advocate for this child like they were your own, right? Like, you take them to doctor's appointments, you rock them to sleep, you take care of them when they're sick. And then you hand them back after however long of taking care of them. And foster care, it can go on for years depending on what's going on in your case and how the parents are doing, right? So sometimes we've had kids as short as a couple months, and then we've had kids as long as a year. And I know many foster families who have had kids years to finally get to some type of resolution.
And after those years, are they still engaging then in that reunification process?
Sometimes. It just depends on the case and what's going on. So there are times when children have been reunified after being in foster care for 2-3 years. But the goal is to try and have some type of permanency accomplished within 12 months. That's the goal. Now, that doesn't always happen. But permanency looks like either being adopted or being reunified back home, or even closing the case in what we call permanent guardianship, where that person is your identified permanent guardian long-term if we're not able to terminate the parental rights, but also not safely reunify.
Got it.
Mm. And this, I guess what intrigues me is the process by which all this happens. And there's a lot of complications that I think deter a lot of people from looking at this option, but they're not left alone. There's a lot of resources. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what that's been like from when you were, in charge of placing children in homes, but also for you as a parent?
Yeah, there are a lot of resources, and it obviously depends on your area and what they have available, but many areas do have resources. So they have your foster family support specialists. They're the ones who license your home. So we have our foster family support specialist that comes out and they walk through the home. They do it quarterly and make sure that everything is continuing to be safe, just checks and balances. But then also when we get a new placement, they're the first ones to bring us a meal or to bring us clothes that they have in the foster closet, and to make sure that we have everything we need to be successful in getting this new child who typically comes with absolutely nothing. So they help with resources that are in the community. They help with the kind of the go-between between case management and then the foster family. So you're not having to do everything. So those resources are really important to have, and it helps us a lot too, down from having a person to talk to and vent to having someone who can bring clothes, just to be able to take that need off of your back.
I've had that question before, and I don't know the answer. I have very little experience myself with the foster system. When families decide to take in a foster kiddo, are there financial resources that the state, county, government, anyone gives to them, or is it solely out of their pocket?
That's a great question. You do get some payment. It is pretty minimal when you start to think about it. So for example, we have 2 kids right now in our home. They are under the age of 5. So both of them require childcare because my husband and I both work. And we get about $900 a month for both kids, total $900. Wow. So think about how much childcare is, multiply that times 2. They're both in diapers or pull-ups. They both require food and formula. So they both need clothes. They both came with nothing, right? So we got one straight out of the hospital. When I say nothing, I mean nothing. We had to bring clothes for him to leave the hospital, car seats, the whole 9 yards. So all of those are things that we have to purchase or have donated to us. And then we have the stipend that we get every month.
And are families aware of that? Like when this comes into play, like we have support, but there may not be enough to cover what you need, or that there's a need that you find out in this process and we aren't able to cover that. Like, what does that look like? Yeah,
it is a part of the conversation because that's part of the home study process. So they'll say, they go through they get in your business. They go through your finances with you. They ask about what your bills look like and can you logically support another child in your home with minimal resources on the department side. And that's a very realistic conversation that your foster family support specialist should be having with people who are interested in getting licensed. An example that I would say is one of our kiddos that we have has some developmental delays. We have him seeing a neurologist every week. And every week we go in, Medicaid doesn't cover that. So we're paying out $100 every week to take him to a neurologist to continue to make sure that his needs are being met. But that alone, it doesn't, our stipend doesn't nearly cover that need. Right. So we pay for it out of pocket because it's in our child's best interest and we love him like he was ours.
Wow.
I'm just thinking about the costs in my head. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and the cost of diapers alone, I mean, it's between $35 to $40 a box, depending on brand and size. And then you add car seat and food and clothes and all the things. Daycare for us alone is, it's asinine. We'll put it that way for 2. But it is close to the $2,000 mark per month. And so the idea of only having $900 to cover both, like that's, wow.
And there are resources. Sorry, Greg.
No, go ahead. There are resources.
I was going to say that there are resources. So they'll do like a childcare referral, which helps cut down on the cost of childcare, but it's still not like it doesn't cover it fully. So you're still expected to come out of pocket. And the kicker is, so it covers a certain amount, right? But childcare, we'll just say, for an example, childcare costs $50 a day, but the stipend may only cover $25 a day, the referral. So then you have to pay that extra $25 a day out of pocket. That's your out of pocket expense. Now there are, as you know, as a mom, you probably know there are daycares that are better than others. And the ones that are not as good, maybe $30 a day. So then you're only paying $5 out of pocket. So it creates this imbalance where we want our kids to have quality childcare,
Sure.
but there's a significant cost to a foster parent putting that child in quality childcare because it's not covered by the state. Whereas you could put them at, Sally Joe's down the street and maybe not have an out-of-pocket expense, but are they really getting a quality education? And these are children who are behind, right? They come to us with typical, developmental delays, behavioral challenges. They may be behind in their speech or in their development physically. So every child that I've had in all of our years of fostering has required additional services, whether it be speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, or more frequent visits to the doctor. One of our current kids right now came to us with no shots. She was 2 and she'd only been to the doctor one time. And so we then had to take on the burden of getting her caught up on everything because she didn't have it. So as a foster parent, you're not taking your typical neurotypical child into your home, like my biological kids who don't have any of these needs. I'm taking in a child who has experienced some type of trauma.
And that's what I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what I'm curious about is, there's maybe this desire to adopt. And maybe these parents have already had children, and so they have parenting skills and experience, but it's a little different when you're bringing a child in here with a background riddled with trauma, even in utero. And I'm curious of what your thoughts are on that process for parents, and even for yourself as a foster parent of what is that like for you with that extra demand and extra need, and what resources are there for you?
Yeah. And you just have to be prepared going in. And I think it's almost the unspoken conversation. Like, these children have significant needs. Even if you're taking a baby, the baby that we have right now, well, he's 7 months now, but we got him from the hospital. He had never even been home, but mom had done substances in utero. Mom had a lot going on in her life and was stressed out. And so all of those factors have played into his development. And so now he requires anywhere between 3 to 5 appointments a week that my husband and I are taking him to. And then we also have his sister on top of that, because you want to keep siblings together. And then she also has needs because she'd never been to the doctor and she had speech therapy issues and she had a chronic runny nose and snoring. So she needs to go to the ENT. And then you add on top of that your insurance is Medicaid, which is not accepted everywhere and is truly accepted by your agencies that are willing to take a lower payment for service. And when I called and made the appointment with the ENT the other day, they said, well, you get put on the last of the list because you have Medicaid, and those clients are most frequent to cancel. So instead of getting an appointment in 2 weeks, I have an appointment in 2 months for my child who has needs. And they said that straight out, like, because you have Medicaid,
discrimination,
you get bumped to the last of the list. Yeah. And I'm like, but I'm a foster parent. Like, I'm going to come. You can guarantee I'm going to be here. But that's the way the system is built. So it almost feels like you have all these things stacked against you, and you have to be the one to fight for these kids and get them back on track.
And what tips do you have, and even stuff that you do, or that you've helped families that are fostering children to cope with that stress or get a break from that?
So there's a couple things that you can do. First and foremost, I would say you have to have a solid relationship with your partner, whoever that is. So if you're not solid and you don't have a solid foundation, don't foster, because if there's going to be cracks, if there's going to be cracks in your relationship, and it's going to cause additional stress, because the foster system is stressful, and it's going to cause additional stress in your relationship, it's going to create an even bigger divide. So making sure that your relationship with your partner is solid and that you can take on that additional stress that the system will bring into your life, and having this high needs child into your life, you have to make sure that your relationship is solid and that things with your kids are solid. Like, you need to make sure going in to that situation that you've had those ongoing conversations with your kids. We talk to our children every time we are talking about saying yes to a placement. How do you feel about this? This would mean sharing a room. This would mean a baby waking up in the middle of the night. This would mean crying. You know, how does that make you guys feel? And are you willing to say yes to? Because they're a part of our family unit and it affects them as much as it affects my husband and I. So that would be my first tip. Second, creating a support system. So not everybody's family agrees. And I feel like we've definitely had our struggles with family members who don't agree with our choice to foster. And so you have to be confident in that decision and say, that's okay if they don't agree. This is the life choice that I'm making. Because it has affected some relationships that my husband and I have with both friends and family. I've had family members say, aren't you just going to take a break? And I'm like, that's not how fostering works. Like, they're in your home. There is no break.
So having those boundaries, having that confidence, independence to be able to say no.
There it is again, boundaries.
Boundaries.
I'm counting. I think it's every episode that boundaries have come up, but
having those in place, because you're right. Not everyone will support it. Even if you look at it as a beautiful and altruistic decision, not everyone will.
Yeah.
And who could be a part of that support system? Who are we willing to have that? And Blair, correct me if I'm wrong. Is there something too where foster parents are able to kind of, put the child into another foster family for a brief moment for a break?
Like respite.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly right. So we're actually doing respite right now. We have another child from another foster home. They're actually going on vacation. So it's not because of anything bad that happened, but just because they're traveling and don't have the ability to take that child with them. And we've had several kids for respite before. And it just gives the family a chance to have a break, even if it's just mom and dad going and having, a date night or a weekend vacation to reconnect in their relationship, like either one of you would do in your relationships. It's a chance for the foster family to also get a break, right? And so then other families are able to step into the gap and be that support system.
And that feeds that need, that very first tip you gave of make sure you have a solid foundation, and which part of that is prioritizing your relationship even in the midst of the stress.
Absolutely.
What was your next tip? I interrupted you.
Building a support system. So I think we talked about that was part of my second tip, but sometimes that doesn't include your family, right? So if your family isn't on board or not all your family members is on board, finding other foster families who are going to walk that walk with you, because they're going to understand it better than anyone else. I don't know that I would have survived the 4 years of fostering without my fellow foster parents. I think I'm closer to them than I am to most of my friends that I was with prior to fostering, because people just don't understand it. It's almost, this sounds crazy, but it almost cult-like, because you get it better than anybody else gets it. And so those are your people that you can go to and be like, this is crazy. Like, listen to what these people did, or listen to what court did, and they're going to get it. And if I did that to Taylor and Greg, they would be like, man, that really sucks. That doesn't really make sense. But the foster family would be like, nah, let me tell you about this, right?
Yeah.
So having people who can get in the dirt with you and walk through that messiness, and when it normalizes your experience. And the same thing, like, when we go to a family dinner, that can be really overwhelming for our foster kids, even for our biological kids, but for our foster kids, even more so, right? So we may have a lot of family and it's a lot of fun, but for them, they're in sensory overload. So you have to have an exit strategy and a plan, and not everybody gets that either. And so when you're, doing things with foster families, they totally get it because they walk in that trauma too.
And what is that like from both sides of the coin, working in that and working with families in the foster care, but also being a foster parent yourself? What have you noticed in terms of challenges where you're placing children into a house that already has siblings versus not?
Good question.
That is a good question. It really depends on the family. We've had a lot of families who already have kids, is pretty typical. And and really a lot of the families, because they have kids, they kind of understand what that child will need, right? They may get them and say, oh, this isn't typical, like, because I've had kids before and this is not normal, so I need extra help. And so then the system is supposed to be able to support them through that. And then families that don't have any kids, you know, they're able to walk that path too. It just may look different because they don't have the same experiences that people who already have kids have had.
That makes sense. And it brings up for me this question of what resources are there for parents who adopt or are fostering a child from a different cultural or ethnic background?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we had 2 kiddos that were biracial, and I had no idea how to do their hair. And we are always more than happy to take any type of culture, religion, that type of thing doesn't matter to our family. But I had no idea. And one of those little girls had these beautiful curls. And I was like, I have no idea. And so we have trainings that you can go to where they teach you how to do hair, how to braid, or what different products to use, and things like that. It is super cool. But until you're like faced with that situation, it's great information, but you don't get to put it in practice. And we have some really amazing foster families that are able to help. I had another foster family come over and help me do her hair and show me how to do her hair and what to use and how to wash it, and how frequently you wash it and the right rubber bands to use, because it's a different rubber band than what you put in a white person's hair. All those different things that you wouldn't ever think about, but that you then have to learn.
Beautiful kinship.
It's very interesting.
I just see this like kinship that is developed uniquely within the culture of foster parents, right?
Very much so.
I love that. What about in terms of with culture honoring traditions or rituals or identity?
Yeah, that's actually something we bring up in the home study when we're first licensing foster parents. Is there anything that you wouldn't be able to do or wouldn't want to walk that path on? Same with race. Like, is there for any reason, like a particular race that you don't feel comfortable fostering? And then if you get a child, like my husband and I, we don't have a preference. We would just walk that walk with them. We've always said, if we have a child who has a Jewish background, we would take them and do those. I don't know about it, but I would learn about it and I would walk that path with them. And I would really use the parents to help me know what that looks like for them, right? What do you celebrate? How do you celebrate that? And for me, this is kind of unheard of, or unusual, I'll say. We've had 9 kids. We have 2 currently. Wow. All 7 have gone home. They've all been reunified.
That's beautiful.
It is. And I count that because we work with the parents so closely. Because I worked in the system, I saw how important it was to have these really close ties with the parents. It keeps them super involved with their kids. And I think it makes them fight harder to be reunified. So we do visitation for all of our kids with their parents, instead of having the system do it and have it be in a white room with 4 walls with a couple random toys that every other child has played with, where a random person is watching you. We do all of those visitations. We communicate with the parents and send pictures and give them updates like, hey, we went to the doctor today. This is what happened. And by us doing it, it creates a bond with the biological parents. And I think that helps them want to fight to be reunified. And so all those kids have been reunified and we still have contact with all of them. But that's one of the ways we learn about, like, do you go to church? What does your religion look like? What would you like us to do? Is there a way you want us to do their hair? We had one parent that didn't want us to cut their kiddo's hair. And so we just had to walk that path with them and do what the parent's preference was, because we had that open relationship and communication with them.
I love that the parents are included in the kinship. It's not this dichotomy of the foster system and then the parents, or this punitive kind of space.
And tell me, is there some assessment of safety though? Because maybe sometimes it's not a healthy or the best option for the child to bring the parent back in.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely times where there's a safety risk, and we rely, as foster parents, we rely on the system to tell us that. Like, this is not a safe situation. You should not be alone. Like, visitation needs to be in the office. One of our cases, we were doing the visitation, and the mom became almost belligerent and was threatening our family. And so we, at that point, made the decision, like, we're no longer willing to supervise these visits because of these actions that occurred. And so, unfortunately, now they do need to be at the visitation center and not done by us, by a professional instead. And so, we talked about boundaries earlier, but setting up those boundaries, like, this is what I'm willing to do. But then if XYZ happens, then I'm going to say this is not safe anymore. And I'm going to put my boundary back up.
And confidently willing, right? Not just willing because I feel like I have to, or because I feel bad if I don't, or I feel pressured, but knowing whether it is in that situation, or boundaries of the kids you feel safe and equipped to take on, or boundaries with your outside kinship, but really being secure in those, so that we don't have to succumb to pressure or wear ourselves out or our relationship out.
Absolutely.
And going back to what you were talking about earlier, is this is a family decision, and you have a conversation about the introduction of a new child into the house, managing the stress as a family together, navigating that, hence why you need that solid foundation. But then I'm curious of how, as a family, and you've noticed both on the side with working with families, but also for yourself, what is that discussion like, or how does that get processed in terms of the anticipatory loss of when the child is reunified?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've been through it a couple times. And so for us, we really start talking to the kids. I mean, really right from the jump, like, the goal is for them to go back home, and we give them age appropriate updates on how the parents are doing, right? If they're doing really good, they're going to have extra visits, or they're going to have visits where, we don't have to be there anymore. So it's unsupervised. And we keep our kids very aware, again, in an age appropriate way, about what's happening with the case. The same coming in, right? So we would say, we've been called about a kiddo. There's some substance abuse issues, and they know what that means. Like, mom or dad was using drugs. And so the baby may cry more, or the baby may be fussy, or the baby may have issues with eating. And so they'll be up more, or whatever the situation is. That's just one example. And we have those very open conversations with our kids, because it, like I said, it impacts them too. And the same as they go out, right? Like, mom's doing so good, and so we're not as worried about that safety anymore, because she's done these different things that have helped her, get back on track. And so now she gets to have unsupervised visits, or now she gets to have overnight visits. And so they feel confident as well in those decisions as the child then transitions back out, and they're a part of the goodbye. When our first little one left, we did like a party, right? It was a celebration that they were leaving. It wasn't goodbye forever. It was goodbye because he was going back home, which is what we want to have happen.
Beautiful.
And how do you, as an individual, manage that loss, that grief, all the effort?
I couldn't do it.
I'm just thinking of, you talked earlier about all the stress and all the needs and all the attention. The appointments every week, and just the resources you've had to tap into to get the child the needs. And then you're saying goodbye. What's that like for you?
Yeah, for us, it's real. It's incredibly hard. I've cried more tears over kids that I didn't birth than probably the kids I did birth. Because it's in a very emotional process. And, I can't speak for every foster family, but for us, we treat these kids just like our own children. There's nothing we wouldn't do to make sure they had their needs met. We stay home from work. The baby we brought home from the hospital, my husband took 6 weeks off from work because he couldn't go to daycare until he was 6 weeks old. And that's a commitment that you make to saying yes. And so it's emotional. And typically what we do after we say goodbye, or so long, because so far all the families have kept us still involved in some,
I love that,
some form, but that's not every situation. And so we do a family trip and reconnect as just our 4 core family members, my 2 kids and my husband
Oh.
and I. So we typically do a little family vacation and have fun. And we call it, our happy, sad emotions, right? Like we're really happy that they went back home, but we're sad that we don't get to see them every day. And so, we talk about our emotions, and then we try and go and just have a good time as being back to the 4 of us.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So when people
It's just a constant adjustment.
Yeah.
this speaks to something I've also am wondering, when people are thinking about foster care, what are some of the biggest challenges, but also some of the most beautiful moments that you could that they could anticipate happening?
Yeah, the challenges with foster care are many. And so some of them can include, like, you say yes to a placement and then a family member is found. And so then they leave you. Foster care really leaves foster parents in the lurch a lot, is probably the best way to put it, because you just never really know what's going on. Typically, foster parents can be treated a little bit like hotels, right? Like, oh, well, you have an open bed, so insert child here. And you have to be able to say yes or no, and feel confident in that decision making, because the system won't protect you as a foster parent. The system is there to make sure they meet certain benchmarks, and then they get to go home at the end of the day. You're the one living in the trauma. And the system very frequently forgets that. And so you typically don't get to be included in all the meetings that occur about the case that you live every day. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been excluded from because I wasn't a part of the system. I was at the foster parent. So it can be very isolating, which is why having your core group of people can be so important, so that you can kind of talk through all those emotions. But at the end of the day, I always say it's the system that's the hard part, not the kids. Even though they've got a lot of baggage that they come with, they're the easy part of fostering is the kids, because they're easy to love, and you became a foster parent because you felt like you had the ability to do that for them. And then you have the system, which is not, it's a system built to try and fix a problem that isn't really fixable, right? So it's built on human emotions, and it's not systematic, right? And so it's hard to make changes to that system.
And then what are some of the joys or the beautiful parts that families could anticipate if they take on a kiddo?
I mean, truly, as much as we would love to adopt, being able to see kids reunify with parents who have done their due diligence to make their lives better, and kids get to go back home and be in that environment is beautiful. As hard as it is beautiful. And seeing the kids that you've taken in progress, right? So the 2-year-old that we have now, when she came to us, she had no language, none. She was 18 months at that point, but she had no language. And now she won't stop talking ever. She literally will talk your ear off. And it's amazing. It's amazing to see them grow. And the baby that we took in is crawling, and you get to live through all those really exciting moments. And then you get to share them with the parents and be that person for them that gets to send them the video. Look who rolled over. Look who's crawling. Listen to her talk, right? Like all these different things. And you get to be that connection. And you get to be the one who pats them on the back and says, good job, when they go back home. So it's hard, but it is beautiful, and it is joyful when we see the system actually working to get kids back home.
So that reward of the impact that you're able to bring in these children's, but ultimately their family lives, because what you're doing for them impacts the family as well.
Absolutely. I mean, in 4 years, we've had 9 kids total, but 7 go back home. And I get to have contact with all those families years later and see these kids who are continuing to flourish at home. And as much as we miss those kids, we love seeing them be so great, What
about tips of encouragement if people are ambivalent, or, I've thought about it, but I don't know if I could do it. Do you have any points of encouragement?
Yeah. And I'll say, even if you can't foster, there's always something for you to do, right? Bring a meal, pray, babysit, bring items, whether it's things that you've already used, donate them to a foster family instead of donating them to Goodwill, right? Or buy something new. Like if I take in a kiddo and I post, say like, oh, I'm taking in a kiddo, people will sometimes message and be like, what do you need? Right? Like, what can I get you? Whether it's sending a meal or bringing a car seat or doing a load of laundry or scheduling for a cleaner to come or saying a prayer. All of those things matter. And they all help foster parents because we couldn't survive without that support. So even if you are on the fence about fostering, think about being a respite provider. Think about coming in and babysitting so mom and dad can go have a date night. Things like that make a huge impact on foster parents, even if you choose or determine that fostering isn't quite for you.
That's beautiful.
Great. Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. Any other last minute tips or things that you can think of for families, either who are fostering now or think about fostering, including the relationship, how to make it stable before making that decision?
Yeah. So I'll say my husband and I have gone to counseling twice in our many years of marriage. We met in 2000. So we've been together for 22 years. Wow. And so even through all of that, we've gone to counseling twice to make sure our relationship is really strong, or recognizing when we're struggling and saying, hey, we could really benefit from like a tune-up, right? And going in and making sure that we're having good communication and using the tools that we learned from counseling or from different classes that we've taken as foster parents to make sure that we're really ensuring we continue to have a strong foundation and taking those vacations. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's with kids in general, but especially with foster kids who come from trauma, you have to be very, very solid in your relationship and communicate constantly about what's happening with those kiddos. And you have to think things that you might do in your normal relationship may be triggers for your foster kids. So you have to be able to really manage and walk that walk and try and understand and be in that trauma and grief with those kids that you have.
So that flexibility, curiosity, empathy.
Yeah. And it can be as small as like, maybe they came from a situation with domestic violence. So even when you're frustrated with your significant other, you may raise your voice, but you don't mean it in like a mean way. You're just like, you're making me crazy. Right. But in am I wrong? In situations like that.
Kim's never done that.
Perfect.
Never. My relationship is perfect. I've never raised my voice. But in situations like that, knowing that you have to do that behind closed doors and be able to talk like this, because if you raise your voice or escalate or appear that you're up here and not down here, that child may feel like they're in danger or that mom and dad are fighting. It's a huge trigger, and it can be such little things that are triggering. It could be an outfit, like if they actually got sent with clothes, which doesn't always happen, or you wear an outfit that's similar to something their parent wore when they were pulled from the house. Things like that are triggers, and you have to be ready to stand in the mess with them, because fostering is messy and it's traumatic, and there's all sorts of stuff that you've got to navigate that isn't normal.
Blair, I'm struck by your testimony, not just as a worker within this profession, but as a foster mom. Like, I am just in awe of all that you've given to these kids and your ability to be flexible and patient and kind and loving in what can be, or what sounds like it can be, a really hard system to navigate.
Yeah, it can be, but I wouldn't change a moment of what we've done. And I know my husband feels the same way. As hard as it is, and the relationships that we've lost because of it, and the trauma that we endure secondary to what they've experienced, I wouldn't change it for anything. And in fact, there are times when my husband and I say, is this it? Like, after this case, are we going to close our home because we feel tapped out? It's frequently our kids that say, we can't close. We have to keep serving. We have to keep helping. And they're the ones who keep me going sometimes when we're having a hard time.
Yeah. That example of what it is to give and serve, to be flexible, to really kind of give up parts of ourselves in light of bringing in new parts of ourselves.
Yeah. It's loving unconditionally.
Thank you so much, Blair, for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
As always, if anyone has any questions for Blair, we'll include potentially her contact information for follow-up questions in the link below. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. We just love having guests on here to expand what blind spots Greg and I do have, because even though we've been doing this for a decade, we're going to have blind spots all the way until we retire. This has been Relationships Inside Out, where we break down relationships in all forms, including foster, and how to do that in a healthy and loving manner.
Thank you.